Sometimes you have one plan for a story and then it decides to go in a completely different direction. Well, what do you do next? Well, in this interview with the awesome Tabitha Caplinger, she shares what happened when she had to deal with her stories getting vulnerable and what it looks like to balance her need to tell this heart story and to tell these things that were really important to her, but also thinking like a reader and editing and making sure that the story that was on her heart was also one that she could communicate to readers in the way that they wanted to connect with and read. This is super, super valuable. Having ways to figure out how to connect your heart stories with readers and communicate that effectively so that everyone wins is something that I'm a huge fan of. And Tabitha shares some really fantastic insight about that. So make sure that you tune in for that. And real quick, you're going to hear the word author elevate occasionally. That was my previous title for this podcast. And of course, now I use Janeen Ippolito or author culture. But if you're a little bit confused, that's what that's about. But the episode is fantastic, and I cannot wait for you to listen to it. And now it's time for our What My Book Taught Me feature with Tabitha Caplinger. Tabitha, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I love seeing what you're doing online with your Tuesdays with Tab things. I love tuning into those and such. And you always have some of the most encouraging and convicting memes and messages I see on my social media.
I'll take it. I will take that as a win.
I'll stop my scroll to go, oh, that reminds me of something that I was studying this morning. Okay.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
I call it a good hurt. A good hurt.
It's good pain there.
I like those moments.
Yeah.
That are equal parts encouraging and challenging.
I think we need that because it's really easy on social media to sometimes it's either, cute animal memes, which I will never not stop for, just saying.
Obviously.
Or kind of doom scrolling or stuff, or things that are encouraging, but in ways that can almost, I'm well, that's encouraging unless you're doing something really harmful to yourself or others, something really objectively bad. And then I don't want you to keep doing that. Those things always follow your heart. And I'm I can think of at least 5 people that I'm not sure I want them following their heart right now.
That's not always great advice. It sounds good, but it's not always great.
Yeah. All right, listeners and viewers on YouTube, to let you know a little more about Tabitha, she is the author of the Chronicle of the Three trilogy, The Wolf Queen, and most recently, The Wayward. She writes stories with a touch of the fantastical for young women and the not-so-young women struggling to know who they are and what they are worth. She wants to help them discover their identity and live for their purpose on purpose. She's also a wife, mom, pastor, and professed TV addict. It's seriously a problem, but she doesn't plan on getting help anytime soon. However, she'd be happy to talk about Supernatural or Buffy or just about any show with you. So I got to stop here. So we mentioned Supernatural or Buffy. Here's just a quick question I'm just going to throw at you. Which one is your favorite?
Supernatural.
Okay. So are you part of the Supernatural fandom?
Oh yeah.
That whole...
I to the point that my husband finally watched the show, and then 2 Christmases ago, I think. All of the Christmas presents he got me were Supernatural inspired, pretty much. There were keychains, mugs, shirts, and an autographed copy of the pilot script, which was the best thing ever. And so, we send each other Supernatural memes and TikToks all the time. So yeah, I have to say, I love Buffy and I love Angel, but I have to say Supernatural is my favorite.
That is fair. That is fair. It says here you love good TV so much, mostly because she loves the stories. She can't help but get lost in the worlds created and invested in the lives of the characters. She brings that same passion for the story and characters to her own writing, whether it's slaying demons or dragons. And when she isn't writing, Tabitha, her husband, and 2 beautifully sassy daughters desire to be Jesus with skin on for those around them. They live to love others and for Marvel movies. I mean... Yeah, this just makes total sense. Of course, then I have to ask favorite Marvel movie or TV show. So one out of all of the Marvel universe.
Out of all of them.
All of it, yes.
Oh, man. I feel like any answer I give here is going to offend someone in my family, one of my daughters specifically, because I know their favorites. And I don't know. I feel like it's a whole universe.
Okay, so top favorite series and favorite movie. There we go. That
Okay,
breaks up a
like
little bit.
that's so hard. I feel this is mean. So my favorite series was WandaVision. I loved
Yes.
WandaVision. And favorite movie, I'm gonna go with Captain America: The First Avenger. Like I love all of them, but the Captain holds a special place in my heart, and so that's the only reason I'm picking that one. A close second would be Wakanda Forever and Black Panther.
Yes.
And so, but I feel like that's a hard question and a little bit mean.
Oh, it is. It's terribly mean. This is why I like to run the podcast. So I'm like, notice I'm not asking myself this question.
Yeah, like, well, Janine, what is your favorite Marvel movie?
Oh, okay. Well, actually, my favorite series, and this has just come out of my culture nerd thing, and it's something where I know it didn't get the greatest ratings, and I really don't care. I liked Ms. Marvel.
Yeah.
Because from my like background in studying cross-cultural things and like learning about different stuff, I absolutely loved the inclusion of her family. I loved how they actually brought the historical stuff into that with immigration. I just nerded out over all of that. And then also, she was just a hoot. Like I loved that I think she was the one that was the most, felt like a teen, like a regular teen. And
which is nice because that doesn't,
you don't
usually
see that.
it's teens who act like 20 somethings.
Yeah.
And yeah.
She was not a Dawson's Creek teen there. I'm dating myself.
Yeah,
for those of
that's
teens
okay.
now who are like, what is that? I'm like, oh yeah, back in the like late 90s.
A Paula Cole song is now
Yes.
floating
Oh
through
my
my
goodness.
brain.
I mean, as you do, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved Ms. Marvel for that. And I think like a close second would be like WandaVision, but Ms. Marvel, because WandaVision towards the end, I was not quite as much a fan of it. But Ms. Marvel was just so much fun. So that was a hoot for me. And then movies, you know what? This is a really hard one for me too. I am trying to think. I really liked the first Iron Man.
Yeah.
In terms of an
hard.
overall, a whole overall cohesive story. I really loved that one. Oh, but then again, I was thinking about the TV series. Oh, I really liked Agent Carter. The first season of Agent Carter.
Oh, that was
really
good too.
That
I
was
forgot
a
about
really good
Agent
one.
Carter for a minute. There's so much that
I
it's
know,
like
there's
trying to filter all of it through your brain. And also everything ties together so much that it's hard to pick like a favorite because like that one story feeds into so many other stories. I feel like I just like Marvel, and can we leave it?
Yeah, it was a mean question, but I did have to go there, so we went there.
Fine. It's fine.
All right, now talking about all of your awesome books. So first off, how long have you been writing?
I have been writing, I would say I thought about this and casually, like tinkering with writing, thinking about writing, probably since college. I feel like I've always had an imagination and stories going on in my head, but the idea that I could actually put them down and write them or write anything started in college. So that's about 25 years, give or take. And, but intentionally, like professionally with the intent of, I'm actually going to finish this story and try to get it published, has been about 10 years.
Okay.
And when I say give or take, I tried to do the math in my head and I was like, I don't know. We're just going to round number it here.
So towards that, like what gave you that first push to start writing in college? Because I know listening to some authors, they'll say, I started writing when I was 6 or these things or those things. Yeah. So, that's a little bit later for you. I mean, college is still not that late. But what gave you that push to actually get your stories on paper?
It's actually kind of a weird and interesting story of how it happened. I started college kind of a semester late. And I went for a couple semesters before I transferred to Bible college. I went to Sweetbriar University in Virginia, which is an absolutely beautiful all-girls school with so much tradition and history and a gorgeous campus. And I absolutely loved it there. And because I was a semester late, lots of classes are already full, lots of things. And I went in kind of, it's one of those things, like you're in high school and you think what you want to be when you grow up. And then suddenly you're 18 and going into college and you have no idea what that high school person was thinking.
Yeah.
And so I went in and all of a sudden it was like, I want to do journalism.
Okay.
Particularly photojournalism. And I can't tell you where that came from. Because that had not been a thought in my head for most of high school. I took photography classes and I liked that, but and so I went, when I first got to Sweetbriar, that was my intent. All the photography classes were full.
Wow.
And they didn't have any journalism classes. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? And so I was looking at the list, and majoring in creative writing was an option. And I felt like that was a good option because it was going to be writing. It was going to be, I felt like the two connected.
Yeah.
And so I chose creative writing as my major. And it was funny, I was only there for, I think, 3 semesters total before I transferred to Bible college.
Wow.
But during those 3 semesters, aside from a couple fencing classes and like physics, every class I took was a writing class. I took novel writing, I took poetry, English composition. One of the professors, and like all of my professors were published authors. My creative writing professor and poetry professor was Carrie Brown, who at the time was, her most recent novel was a New York Times bestseller.
Yep.
Her husband, John Brown, was my faculty advisor. And so I think that's where I started viewing writing differently. And I fell in love with creative writing and fiction writing more so than the idea of journalism. And then God kind of changed some things in me, and I went to Bible college and became a youth pastor. And so that's why it started in college. And then it took so long to actually write a story because I had to go through about 10 years of feeling like, well, pastors are supposed to write devotions and nonfiction.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And I did write a nonfiction book that is no longer out in the world because I self-published it and I had no clue what I was doing.
Oh, one of those.
But I stand by the content, but it needed a lot of work. But and that book taught me a lot and taught me a lot of discipline as a writer and setting goals as a writer. There's so much I learned from that experience. One of the things was I also do not like writing nonfiction. I did not enjoy it as much. I tried to start another nonfiction book after that and just couldn't do it. And when I got the idea for my first story, that's where it really went. It took me back to those college days and creative writing and writing poetry and how much I loved that and connected with story. And so that's how that started in college and not before.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I kind of get those vibes of like when you're in a certain place, you kind of feel like you have to do a certain thing. And I mean, my first books that I actually had out were curriculum because I was a teacher at the time, and so curriculum was just something I wrote anyway. So I was like, look, it's world building curriculum because I can do this. But I definitely get that pressure of like, well, if you're in ministry or ministry adjacent or anything like that, you feel like, well, I should do something with that.
Yeah.
Still get some funny looks with being married to a missionary and such, and like going around like, oh, so you write nice books? And like, I write books. Yeah. And they're like, oh, so they're like these nice Christian romances. I'm like, they're general market urban fantasy. And they go, okay. And I am super thankful that all the people in my life and at our churches where we're on staff at are super supportive and buy my books and read my books. And but it was really a thing that I had to wrestle with and really come to that point. Writing for me is a way that I connect with God. Yeah.
And so, and story and that being creative is a really huge part of that. And I think it's part of how he's wired my brain. Because like I said, even as a kid, I always had a story going on in my head. I just never thought to write them down.
Yeah.
And even now I still will get people, my publisher included, like, don't you want to write that Live Chosen book? Like, don't you want to write that nonfiction?
Yeah,
like,
that ties into like your branding and stuff.
Yeah, and I'm like, no, I don't. I'm like, I have to write sermons. I wrote curriculum for youth ministry for years. I do a lot of Bible stuff on my social media and my website, and I'm like, I feel like that's enough. That the things I need to say or want to say or feel like I'm supposed to say in that realm, I say in those arenas. And as an author, I want to tell stories.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, no. I mean, I won't say that I will never write the nonfiction book, because then I feel like God is always like, well, challenge accepted. But that's where it started for me. And it's funny because when I first started publishing fiction, like I said, at that point, I'm so far removed from college that you kind of forget that even happened. Like, did I? And I went through this one phase where I was really struggling with imposter syndrome and really struggling with feeling like, am I good enough at this? Like, and I remember sitting and kind of going, you know, all of these other people have degrees in this, and they've taken all of these classes and done all of this study in their craft, you know, in writing, and you didn't do any of that, and yet you think you can write a book. And very clearly, I know it was the Lord kind of going, but you did. Like, remember those like 3 semesters that you were at Sweetbriar, and every class you took almost was a writing class, and you had these really amazing authors critiquing your work and teaching you. Remember that? Like, you did do some of that. You did learn the writer things. You just had a gap before you used them.
Which, you know, those things always come back in interesting ways, and later on your journey, nothing ever is wasted for that. And that's just fascinating to see. Well,
that's so cool.
We already talked about what kind of books or stories you write a little bit in your bio, where you mentioned about, you know, purpose and writing for like women who are young women and women who like, you know, feel like young women or young at heart, or et cetera. So what specific kinds of book genres do you write in?
It's funny. I always kind of have a love-hate relationship with this question because I feel like there's this one side of writing and publishing where you're supposed to like have your genre, and that you write this genre. And I never am like, oh, I'm going to write this genre. I just write a story that I like. And my publisher decides what genre it is later. But so I'm always like, I don't really know how to answer that question. But I write mostly speculative fiction. So urban fantasy. The Wayward was a little bit sci-fi. My readers called it cottagecore sci-fi, which I thought was adorable. And it's got a little dystopian twist in there because I just do what I want. And don't consider it. And so it's a wide range, but it all fits, I think, under that speculative fiction, fantasy, sci-fi umbrella somewhere.
And you tapped into something really important about genre, which is like for authors, and I think you hit on a really good thing with authors where sometimes we can think it's like, you know, I just wrote a book, or I wrote it in this angle, and then somehow these things showed up, and that's not really the same focus for me. But it really is just about what readers are calling it and how they're talking about it to each other and communicating it. So in some ways, it's interesting that genre, because it's that kind of marketing label, it is more of a reader thing. But that way, you know, all of our listeners out there who might be interested in your stuff, you know, check her out for her urban fantasy things. Check her out for what she's got going with a sci-fi cottagecore, which just sounds like an amazing mashup. I have a huge heart for like those mashups that are like, well, okay, we're going to do this.
I didn't even think of that. One of my ARC readers, when the book was getting ready to launch, labeled it as that. And I was like, that's actually really kind of perfect in this weird, I don't know how it makes sense way, but then you read it and you're like, okay, it makes sense.
There you go. There you go. So what story or story series are we talking about today that taught you something?
I thought we would talk about The Wayward because it's my latest release. Like I said, my readers dubbed it cottagecore sci-fi. It's a little bit sci-fi, a little bit dystopian, a little bit something that probably cannot be labeled given all of those things mashed together. But it's kind of freshest in my head, and I think it, you know, I did learn a lot with this book.
Awesome. So what was your favorite part about writing the story, or about the whole experience of having it published?
For this book, it was kind of, I think my favorite part is going to sound weird, but it was my favorite. It wasn't my favorite in the moment, but looking back, it's my favorite. And that was it was really wrestling with this story. This was the first book where I didn't know how it would end right from the start.
Yeah.
I'm a plotter, and so I tend to outline, at least all the major plot points. I call myself a flexible plotter.
Yeah.
Because, I allow for a lot of room, but I always have the main plot points. And usually when I first get a story idea and I first start thinking about how the story will start, I know the beginning and I know the ending pretty clearly right off the top. And some other ones, as I wrote, one of my other stories, The Wolf Queen, I always knew what would happen in that one. And when I got there, I had to be like, are you sure? Like, you're going to do this. It's going to be big. But for The Wayward, it was really the first one that I did not know how I was going to end it. I didn't know how I was going to tie it all together. I didn't know what that big conclusion would be until I got to it. And even then, I think I sat for 2 days just staring at my computer screen, kind of trying to really piece it together and figure out what was the right way to bring this all together. And it was kind of stressful, but watching it unfold at the end and how it all tied together was this really beautiful moment. And so I think that was my favorite part of this, was watching it come together when I didn't know if it, like, part of me, I'm like, I don't know if this is all going to work out. I don't know. I may have put all of this, because I also write in order. Like, I can't jump around scenes.
Yeah.
I have to write in order. And so there was a lot of time where I'm like, I could have just put 60,000 words in here and not have a story, because I can't figure out how it's going to end. And then watching it kind of come together, like, so it was really cool and ended up, I think, being really beautiful. So I loved that.
Yeah, that's really inspiring too. I think because it's interesting how authors, we generally seem to know how we work, especially when you get like 3 or 4 books and you're like, okay, God, I think I got my process here. I think I know how I do this. And then you get a book that's like a curveball and you're like, wait,
that's not how
I'm
that goes.
questioning everything. Wait, what's going on with this? So it is always good that sometimes you just have to lean in and just keep going through it anyway, which can also be just a great metaphor for life and the whole publishing process in general.
For sure. And it was really different. Like, it was really uncomfortable for me because, like I said, for even the first books I wrote were my Chronicle of the Three trilogy. And I knew before I wrote the first word, I knew how each of those 3 books would start and end. Partially because I viewed them through the lens of a TV show. And so I'm like, where would season 1 end? Where would season 2 be? And so I just knew. And then the next story was The Wolf Queen, and I knew it was a very uncomfortable and like climactic piece to write, because I was like, I don't know how people are going to feel about this, but I knew it, and I knew it was the right piece. It was just how do I write that in a way that isn't like, doesn't make everybody go, oh my, like, what did she just do? But that everybody really feels it, and it gets the emotion that I am hoping for, right, at least. And then The Wayward comes along, and I knew these characters, and I knew the direction they were going, but I'm like, I've got to have an ending. I've got to have that climactic moment. I've got to have that and I don't know what that's gonna, like, what are they gonna do? It's like you sit and talk to your characters, and you're like, okay, guys, like, we're gonna need to have a little team meeting, because I'm going to need you guys to tell me what you're going to do in this situation to defeat the aliens, because I don't know. And it was weird because there was so much in that. And at the time that I wrote it, things that were going on in the world, that suddenly I felt very aware of how I write this, given the themes, given the content, given what's happening in the world. Like, I very much felt aware that how I write this, I didn't want it to add to some of the negative things out there in the way that we deal with conflict. And so it was like, how do I do that in a way that isn't just, I didn't want it to be all we're going in guns blazing, because that felt very volatile at the time that I was getting to those scenes. And so that was difficult on its own. But like I said, kind of making myself wrestle through all that and was really cool.
Yeah.
In the moment, it was not. In the moment, I was so stressed out, and I was like, I'm never going to finish this book. I love these characters. No one's ever going to know them because I can't figure out what to do. But I really loved how it turned out, and I loved the way that it resonated with people.
Now, going into the next question, I mean, this question, of course, is what was your least favorite part about writing the story or about the whole experience about having it published? Is that also wrapped up in this, or is that something different?
No, it's something different.
Okay.
As much as that was stressful, like as soon as I wrote the ending, I felt so good about it, and I knew that the wrestling was worth it. So that's definitely not my least favorite. I've never really been a fan as far as the whole publishing process of editing. You know, I don't think anyone is. Like, you write this thing and you put all this work into it, and then it gets picked apart, which is a good thing.
Yes.
But it can be really hard, and it's not as much fun as the initial storytelling where you're just letting it all go. And I've gotten better at how I just emotionally process editing. But this one, the Wayward really stretched me even more than other books. There were some really, this was the first one where really there were some major things that needed to be rearranged or changed or taken out. And so there were some really painful moments where I had to let go of my wants in order to mold it into what the reader would need. I actually ugly cried when I got my editor's notes back while I processed some of my darlings that needed to be killed for the good of the story. I had like a whole just very emotional moment because, for instance, one of the things that I absolutely adored about this story when I started it was the first line of the book. And my editor is like, I don't think that should be the first line of the book.
Oh, boy.
I think that should be later. You need to build up to that. And I was like, but it's a really great first line. And everything in my head was this story starts at this moment. And so having to really, and part of me wanted to be like, nope, not changing it. I'm gonna put down my veto card and I'm gonna do what I want. And for a hot minute, that's what I thought that I was gonna do. I was gonna be like, no, I disagree. And so, and I really stopped and was like, no, I need to think about this from the perspective of my readers and what's really going to create the emotional payoff for them. And so I did make that change. And I'm glad that I did now, but at the time that was really my least favorite part because there was so much about this story that had to be shifted around and changed. This is the first time in editing I had to add some chapters at the front end, and which that was kind of fun, coming up with some new things, but it was really my least favorite part because I had poured so much of myself into the first drafts and my revisions that kind of getting those edits back and there needing to be so much changed kind of in some fundamental things was not fun. I was not a fan.
Especially because like it seems like you really dive into that wonder of the story in the first draft, and so then having to come back and like sort of, as I call it for sometimes, sort of like pinning the butterfly to the page. You have this beautiful thing, and there it is, and it's like, okay, nope, take this, and you have to sort of dissect it and such. And that process, like that transitional process, can definitely be not as much fun. And definitely for a lot of authors, just not as much fun to work through. So with all that, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in like I said, especially for this one, you know, edits are never fun in going through that polishing process. And I love that kind of dissecting this beautiful thing is never fun. And for this one in particular, it was just even more painful. And and it was a good thing in the end. It really was. And I see the value of it now. But when I first got that editor letter, man, my husband, I think, thought that I was going to have a nervous breakdown. He's the real hero in this situation.
The spouse is like, we should just have like a whole podcast for that.
He's like, I know nothing about this story. I know nothing about these characters, but he was trying so hard to help me talk through and process it. So he's the real MVP here in this situation, because I almost was like, you know what? Never mind. We're just not, nobody gets to read this story now because
yeah, we should have like a special day for like writing, like spouses of authors, besties of authors. Just go,
Yep.
Should I be mad at them? Okay, we're not getting mad at them because they did their job as an editor. So what am I supposed to do here?
Yeah.
Like,
what do you need? What do you need?
What do you need?
Like,
so with all that, what did this story teach you overall?
Well, I think there was a super practical writer lesson and then a deeper, more heart lesson. So I'll start with the practical one. I think the practical lesson that this story really drove home to me more than any of the others is the need to view my story through the eyes of the reader after the first draft. Like the first draft can be all for me and what I want, but after that, the need to do that and a little bit more how to do that. Because that, it makes a lot of sense saying it, that, but how to actually do that, which is why good editors are awesome and necessary, because they bring that perspective and helping me appreciate that a little bit more than I have in the past, if I'm honest. But I think that was the really practical lesson for me. And then the heart lesson that this story really taught me was to be brave and vulnerable and take some risks in storytelling. I think that this one really pushed me to my emotional limits. Writing it forced me to question what is happening in the story and how it's going to affect people and some of it was scary, because there are some things that I touch on in the wayward that I was like, I kind of knew there's going to be someone that's going to make them bristle up, or they're maybe not going to like that, or it's possibly going to offend them. And that's never my goal. And certainly not in the really negative ways that we shouldn't want to offend people, even with our writing. But sometimes it's just, you're going to offend someone a little bit because you're shining a light on something that is difficult to navigate and that is nuanced. And I was a little bit scared of some things as I wrote them, and really just that drive, but this is what the story requires. This is what Wilder and Declan believe. This is what Wilder and Declan would do. And you can't hold them back in this situation, because it's going to miss the payoff if you do. If they don't go all in, if you don't say some of the things the way they would say them because you are scared of how someone might feel about it, it's going to detract from the story. And so it really forced me to be vulnerable and to be brave in a way. I think all writing forces us to be a little bit vulnerable. And you're putting a piece of yourself out there into the world for the world to scrutinize. But this was kind of a whole different level of that kind of vulnerability for me. And so, yeah, that's that. And I think I am taking that.
Yeah. So how are you going to apply these things moving forward with this? Like that knowledge of editing, that knowledge of vulnerability? I
think on that practical level with the editing and the having the reader in mind, I've already finished another manuscript for another story, and I'm starting one. And so I'm kind of in two different phases with two different projects. And so I've already kind of done some self edits and revisions on it's codenamed Project Ghost Boy. And really going through it after sending it to my beta readers and really trying to pick it apart from a reader's standpoint. And I think it has benefited the story. And even as I start a first draft on a new project, I'm trying not to self-edit too much as I go and stop the flow of things, but still kind of considering more how this is going to be viewed from is a reader going to understand what I'm writing, because they're not in my own head. And so I think the editing for The Wayward really has kind of retrained my brain in that way as I write. And then for the bravery and vulnerability, I think that it's my next two stories are very different than The Wayward, as all my stories are very different from one another, because I cannot stay in one lane. But I think even in that, it's shifted my mindset as a writer, that I'm trying to hold on to the ways that it pushed me and keep pushing myself with each story in one way or another. And because The Wayward is very emotional, it's can be very intense at times and pretty deep. And Project Ghost Boy is a lot more fluffy. It's kind of paranormal romance. Yeah. There's conversations with a cat. It's a lot sassier. It goes back to my more urban fantasy, witty banter kind of stuff. And so it doesn't hold some of the same, like, really intense content that The Wayward did, but it still is pushing me to, even with that, to be brave enough to say, because the fear with Project Ghost Boy is, well, you just wrote this really intense, deep book. Like, even The Wolf Queen and The Wayward, like, you went from this urban fantasy that one of my friends said it's Buffy meets Gilmore Girls, which I love, and that's like has some humor built in and sass and all of these things, to then you went to The Wolf Queen and you went to The Wayward, and they're much more like serious, feels like not quite the right word, but they're darker, intense, and they don't they're more intense. They don't have the humor, they don't have the sass, they don't have the banter and the fluffier moments. And so as I was finishing up Project Ghost Boy, I'm like, I don't know, like, are people going to hate this solely because if you found me from TCO3, you won't, because there's Easter eggs and everything. But if you found me from The Wolf Queen and The Wayward, this is going to feel different, and it's going to feel a little fluffier, and it's going to feel lighter. But being brave enough to go, but that's The Wayward was the story I needed when I wrote it. The Wolf Queen was the story I needed when I wrote it. And Project Ghost Boy is the story I needed when I wrote it. After two books that were pretty intense and emotionally draining for me, I needed some fluff and some witty banter and a main character who talks to her cat. Like, and so, like, the brave part in that isn't that, oh, there's these intense themes that are maybe going to offend somebody. Although I probably do get a little more overt with the gospel in it than some of my other stories, but also I am a bad judge of how overt I am and how I'm not, because I don't try to ever be that, but this, I think, is a little more so, and that took some bravery on my part. But even just being brave enough to say, this is the story I wanted to write, and it's lighter and fluffier, and it's not the same as The Wayward, and that's okay.
Yep. And that kind of honesty and knowing where you're at with that is so vital. We talk a lot about an author elevate, like knowing the reasons you're writing something, knowing your focus for that, owning where you are with that. Because writing is processing, writing is messy, writing is, you know, despite everything you do, you really have to put yourself into some major boxes to ignore all that. And I know some people who do, and there can be some ramifications for that or not. That's another story. But you know, that's the wonderful beauty and messiness of writing, and how it just interacts with where you are in your life and where you are with your emotions and where you are with your life season and all of that. And so knowing that and having that self-awareness and confidence in that is so, so powerful as an author. Now, time for the random question, which you did not get this one in advance.
I did not. I'm ready.
You can dress like any character in any of your books. Which character do you choose and why?
I can dress like any character in any of my books.
Yes. And you also get any of their accessories.
Any of their, oh, see, that's like, I want to say Wilder from the Wayward just because I feel like it's probably the easiest access and most comfortable in day-to-day life. But Ylva from the Wolf Queen, she gets to carry an axe around.
I mean,
and
that's cool. Yeah.
and a shield. And so why would you not?
There we go.
If you can dress like a Viking, why would you not?
Just
also,
go for it.
I would also argue that her two wolf guardians count as accessories because they're always with her. Okay. And so it would mean that I get to have her wolves.
I mean,
which I would take any day.
Yeah, you just kind of have to explain them to your German Shepherd and everything, but it's great. It's fine.
I think my German Shepherd would jump on board with that.
There we go.
Maybe not. I don't know. But I feel like that's, I just like it. And I'm in my head imagining myself doing my normal everyday things like grocery shopping, trip to the library, dressed like a Viking, carrying an axe with two wolves.
I mean, that just makes your errands like that much cooler. Yeah.
I just feel like it would be fun. There's nothing in my real life that would warrant needing an axe at any time. But why not?
Why not? Just go for it. All right. Well, it's been great having you on the Author Elevate podcast. It's time for shameless promotion and brag time. Where can our listeners find you online? Where should they look up your stuff, etc.?
Well, the easiest place to find me and all of my bookish stuff is at my website, tabithacaplinger.com. From there, you can subscribe to my newsletter, which is my biggest shameless plug. I would love it if you would subscribe to my newsletter. I only send it once a month. It's got some Live Chosen encouragement. It's got updates for my writing. I do fun little giveaways there. And when you sign up, you get some free stuff. You get a free short story and a free kickstart to Living Chosen. So that's always, if you want to keep up with information, that's the best way. My website also has links to all my social media, but on Instagram and Threads, I'm at tab_Caplinger. On Facebook, I'm author Tabitha Caplinger. And I'm mostly on Instagram though. And I've been trying Threads. We'll see. I'm also on TikTok as at tab_Caplinger, but that's just me being goofy with voiceover videos.
Well, I mean, you know what? If it's fun, go for it. And listeners, if you hop over to YouTube, we will have those links below the YouTube video in the description. And if you're listening to this on the Author Elevate website, where we have little blog posts for each podcast, we will also have those links there. Tabitha, thank you so much for showing up on the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing about your book and like the vulnerabilities and everything and your wisdom with us. It was fantastic having you here.
Thank you so much. I so enjoyed this conversation and getting to be here.
Absolutely. And you have a good rest of your day.
I will try.